Hello and welcome. You are listening to Moodally Matters, the podcast that recognizes that your mood matters. Every episode, we talk to a range of amazing guests with experience in some of the top organizations in the world, discussing work life at the crossroads of mood, well-being, and performance. Together, we aim to create better workplaces, one mood at a time. Let's get started with your host, Moodally founder, Erika First.
Hello, and thank you for being with us. I am Erika First, your host of Moodally Matters. I am so honored and so excited to have Rob Simmelkjaer as my guest today. Rob has had a unique and exceptional career path where he's allowed himself to be driven purely by passion and by feeling uncomfortable when he's comfortable. I don't want to spoil any more, so let's get straight to the show. So good morning, Rob, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Erika, it is great to be with you. I appreciate your having me on.
We're so excited to talk to you. Can we start with you taking us on a little bit of your professional journey and what you've done to lead you to where you are today?
Sure. It's always a little painful, like talking about your whole life, but I can give it a go. I think I have to start it in college to really tell the story. I went to Dartmouth College in the United States, in New Hampshire. And, from a pretty young age, there were always kinds of two things I was really interested in, sports and the media side and the playing side of sports, as well as also I've always had an interest in politics and law and things like that. And so those two themes have sort of intertwined throughout my life. When in college, I played a little baseball. And then after I stopped playing baseball, I wanted to stay in that world of sports. I got involved in radio broadcasting, broadcast games for the Dartmouth radio station for hockey, for football, baseball, basketball, and really developed a love of being on the air, telling stories, sort of sending the excitement of live sports to people listening who couldn't be at the game. And that was just something that was probably the first thing I ever wanted to do, was be a broadcaster in sports or in news. And so through college, I got internships at places like CBS Sports and ABC News. I went on to, after getting out of college, worked at a TV station in Hartford, Connecticut as a sort of a new hire, almost an intern. And while I was looking for roles out of college to try to be on the air, which is a really hard thing to find out of college in, the 1990s, I was literally sending like cassette tapes or VHS tapes of myself around to television stations around the country, a little more complicated than it is today. And so while I was going through that process, I also decided, just in case this whole broadcasting thing doesn't work out, I should maybe, have a backup plan and apply to law school. So took the LSAT, ended up getting into some pretty good schools and went to law school. And then after law school,
you can feel free to drop where you went to law school.
I went to Harvard Law School. I went to Harvard Law School in Boston. And then after,
which was your plan B, which is my favorite thing.
Well, when I got accepted there, I knew I couldn't say no to that, because I knew whatever else I might want to do in my life would only be helped by having that experience, having that background, that credential. So that was a great time in my life. I, learned a ton. It was intellectually, riveting, and also made a lot of great friends as well. So after graduating law school, I did this sort of typical go to a law firm, big law firm, did that for a couple of years. Never really felt like that's where I belonged, just didn't feel like the big law firm. Yeah, the money was great. When I looked at the partners and the money they were making, that looked great. But there was just never a day I actually wanted to get up and go in there. For the most part, it was not something I enjoyed. And so I kind of started hearkening back to, the stuff I really loved, the, media, broadcasting, that kind of thing. And started talking to some contacts I had from, my days of college internships. One of the guys who I'd worked for as an intern at CBS Sports had gone on to be a senior executive at ESPN. And we got in touch through politics, actually. We met at a political fundraiser for a guy named Bill Bradley, who was running for president in 2000. And we ended up reconnecting, and he offered me a job at ESPN to be a director of programming and basically to come in. My legal background was useful because they wanted someone who could run the business and legal aspects of relationships with some of the leagues that they did business with. And so I came in just as they were actually completing a deal to have the NBA for the first time on ESPN in like 20 years. And so I came right into that, and I was in charge of the NBA on ESPN for like the first 2 years it was on the air, which was probably still to this day the most fun I've ever had in a job. It was so incredible because I had just gotten out of this law firm that I couldn't stand. Now I'm at the NBA finals. I'm hanging out with like Magic Johnson and, Bill Walton and all these amazing people. And I just felt like I was dreaming. I couldn't believe that I was getting paid to do this. I ended up having a 10-year run at ESPN, doing a number of things. I was the chief of staff to the president for a few years. I worked at ABC News, which is a sister company, for a couple of years. And during that period, I actually got a chance to go back and indulge the on-air stuff a little bit too. And so I started doing on-air broadcasting for various ESPN channels, worked at ABC News on the air for a couple of years. So I turned into this sort of like dual threat, if you will, of executive and on-air person. I took that with me when I left ESPN in 2011 and went to NBC Sports, where I spent 7 years. I was in charge of a division of NBC Sports called NBC Sports Ventures, which is a new business development arm of NBC Sports. My job was to come up with new lines of business or invest in businesses or acquire businesses in some cases. So I did that, launched about 5 different businesses for NBC Sports. And along the way, I broadcast 3 Olympics for NBC. I was a regular sort of anchor for their network sports updates. I was a regular guest on MSNBC and CNBC. So I had this very fortunate and unusual path of being both on the air and on the business side. And then I'll wrap this long-winded story up about my life by sort of transitioning to what I'm doing now, which is, from being on the air, the thing I always found I loved by far the most was what you and I are doing right now. Interviews, conversations, asking someone questions, getting them to sort of tell their story through the interview format. And I had this idea toward tail end of my time there to create a platform that was really all about interviews, basically a place where people could go and find great interview content or help them create their own interviews, whether they wanted to do it for their families or business or things like that. And so I launched this company called Persona in 2019. And I've been doing that ever since, along with a bunch of other things I'm doing, because I can't sit still. I'm always doing 3 things at a time, for better or worse. But that's been most of my focus for the last couple of years.
Okay, well, that's a wild and exciting path that you've taken.
I did my best to give you the highlights. Plenty of lowlights as well.
Right. Well, it's TV. We do highlights, right?
All right.
So you've had a lot of experience. You're working for yourself now, or you're in an entrepreneur situation, and you come
yes.
You come from very different work backgrounds. What are some of the stressors that you came up against in your past life and in your current life, and how are they different?
Well, God, where to start? One thing I think I'll say, you talk about stressors. I think I'm actually someone who almost seeks out stressors in a way, because I feel like when there's tension, and when I feel like challenged and maybe a little underwater, that's probably when I'm doing my best, when I'm growing the most, and when I'm actually sort of expanding my ability and my horizon. Like comfort is something that I just basically am not comfortable with. And so I'm constantly seeking out like different forms of discomfort. I think that's kind of a theme, and that's why I've I think had some of the paths that I've had. And I think one of the challenges that does come with that for someone who's had my kind of path is it's not typical, it's not usual. And I think people have a very strong desire in general, and this has actually been proven by psychological studies that I've read, to put people they meet into some sort of a category. They want to, the term is pigeonhole you typically. That's usually seen as a negative thing, right? Oh, you're a you're an ad sales guy. Oh, you're a programming guy. Or, oh, you're talent, right? Which is being on the air. And it gives people comfort when they can take a person and put them into a sort of a category or a preordained description, because it helps them understand people without having to do too much work, or put in too much effort to like really understanding the contours of like who exactly a person is. And that's not a criticism. It's just people have a lot to process in their life, and it makes it easier if they can take a person and say, oh yeah, this person is category B or category C. And so when you're someone who like spans across multiple categories, it can confuse people and they don't always quite know what to do with you. And that's definitely been something that I have dealt with in my life and in my career. I've learned how to deal with it by just sort of making jokes and saying, yes, well, that's me. I'm always doing 5 things at one time. And over time, people have gotten to know me in that way. And they're less surprised when, oh, I was in a business meeting with Rob yesterday, and then today I look up and he's on television. There's more of a sort of an understanding of that's kind of who I am. But it took some time, and it wasn't without challenges.
So that's actually really interesting, because what I guess the thing that you found stressful was that perhaps people didn't know how to deal with you because they didn't know which category to put you into.
Yes, that's right. And that, sometimes had some specific tensions to it. It was very unusual for me at NBC to be an executive on an executive team who would also regularly get called by the news division of NBC to talk about a news story. And I had to have a lot of special protocols in place so that if I went to go speak on MSNBC about something relating to, maybe some big controversy with the NFL, it was complicated sometimes because, well, I'm an executive over here during the day, but then I'm also commentating on these things on television. And am I commentating in my executive role? Is this a statement on behalf of NBC, or is this just what Rob Simmelkjaer thinks, right? So there were some there was a minefield there in terms of like being careful what I said and who I was representing when I said certain things or did certain things. So that took some work. And yes, there are some occasional pitfalls in that road, but it was worth it. It's been a great experience to have that kind of duality.
So, but in the work that you're doing now, which obviously you get to kind of control, and I'll put that in quotes, your environment, and now you get to decide how many hats you wear and how many boxes you fit into. What are the dynamics that you find today that are causing you stress or not causing you stress? Or maybe now finally you're able to live freely because you get to decide who you're going to be.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that the control that I have over what I do and when I do it is a huge breath of fresh air. I don't really have to ask anyone for the most part, oh, is it okay if I do this or do that? I can make a decision on my own about whether that makes sense and is something I can do. I think the biggest challenges now, and every situation has its ups and downs, are, first of all, making decisions about how I spend my time. And you have to do that in any role or any part of life. But you have to be quite wise about where you spend time, because it's just so limited and there's so much to do. And if you say yes to everything that comes along, you'll find yourself with very little time to do the things you need to do. And then, of course, in more of a startup environment, Erika, there's always just the basic challenge of uncertainty and funding and, the basic things that you need to make a business work, to make life work, right? Not always knowing where that next source of funding is coming from for a business, or, where that next big break or big sort of step up is coming from. The decisions that you have to make, and sometimes you have to make them alone or on a small team, they can be hard. It's, decision making is hard, and you don't necessarily have the infrastructure around you as you do in a bigger company to help make those decisions. Or in some cases, those decisions get made for you. You don't even have a chance to make them. So, it's lonely sometimes when you've got to make those calls on your own. And I love it, but it has its own set of challenges.
Right. And so what are some, like, when you face these challenges, how do you get out of them or how do you face them?
Well, I mean, I think the best thing for me is talking to other people, having a set of people who I can call on and get their perspective and advice. I think other people, mentors or colleagues, former colleagues, investors, people who you just trust, it's really important to have those people. And then it's also really important to use them when you have them. You can have them, but not use them effectively. I think there's a tendency for certain people to be afraid to ask for things, afraid to ask for help. And you cannot be afraid to ask for help when you are in a startup situation where you're trying to do something very difficult. You need so much help. The more you try to take on and do yourself, the harder you're making things on yourself. So having a network, some people formalize that in the form of an advisory board or for the company or for themselves, a personal board of directors, people who you say, hey, would you, and even asking people, and it sounds awkward, right? To go to someone and say, will you mentor me? Will you be an advisor for me on my business or my life? And you'd be surprised when you ask people that. They oftentimes are really flattered and honored. And if they like you and care about you and want to make a difference, they'll happily say yes, and they'll be there for you when you need them. So it's just really important to have people you can call on and when things are going well, and also when things are becoming more challenging.
Okay. And taking that idea of the group and the network or being connected, because you also mentioned that like one of the problems with being an entrepreneur is that it's lonely and or difficult because you don't have the day-to-day, like where you can share decisions and stuff like that. But obviously the group also comes with its own challenges. And, here we talk about mood, obviously. So when, in your experiences in the past and even now, like, how do you find that mood can influence the dynamics of the group and of the workplace?
Well, hugely. I think it starts with yourself and your own mood and the ups and downs that you're going to have. I think being aware of them, calling them out in a way, right? Saying to yourself, or even better, maybe saying to someone else you're working with, this is how I'm feeling right now. This is the mood I'm in. What's causing that? You're feeling anxious. You're feeling maybe somewhat down, somewhat, losing hope on one hand. On the other hand, feeling up, feeling great, feeling hopeful, feeling like good things are going to happen. I think you need to recognize those. I think you need to sort of, in a way, like honor them, right? Like, okay, I'm feeling this way, and let's point out that's how I'm feeling, and let's understand there's a reason for that, and don't blame yourself or give yourself too much credit one day or the other, so you can try to stay as even keeled as you can as you're going through this process. I think that's really important. Then secondly, I think with a group, groups do have moods in a way, right? You don't think of a group having a mood, but you can call it group dynamics or whatever.
Yeah.
Groups have moods, and those moods are caused by the individual moods of the people in the group, as well as the way that group interrelates to each other. And I think a good partnership between two or more people is one where there's some understanding of the moods, right? There's some ability to work through them, right? To recognize them, work through them, and to allow them to be either productive or at least sort of not harmful most of the time. I think where you get into trouble is when moods become counterproductive, when they become value destroying, if you will. If moods, for instance, create situations where people are doing things that are really causing issues or damage, whether it's to the group dynamic or even whether it's to outside people outside the group who you need the support of to be successful. An example I might give would be, I had someone I was working with at one point on the business, and this person did tend to have some pretty significant mood swings. And sometimes I would find, like, late at night, especially maybe after a drink or two, had been imbibed. I wasn't there. I don't know, but I always got the sense that there was this tendency to get these late night sort of missives, these emails that would be really sort of acerbic, and really like aggressive. And that was something I always found, wow, like this is not helpful, because now we have to spend time unpacking that email and all the things that were said, and maybe they shouldn't have been said, right? And you got to spend a day sort of backtracking, and that kind of thing does damage, right, to relationships. So I think it's important for everybody in the team to sort of think about building a set of relationships and a culture, and that every communication, every interaction is part of either building a wall or building a temple, right? Like you're either building something good that brings people together and that is making something good happen, or you're doing something to build walls between people that make it harder to work together going forward. And I think that's where people, I think every member of a group needs to think about, okay, this is the mood I'm in, but how do I not let the negative aspects maybe of my mood create negativity in the group that becomes counterproductive?
And I think that's a great answer. The one question I would ask is, do you find that in your experience that people are generally mood aware, like emotionally aware of how they feel?
No.
Right.
I don't think most people are. I think it's taken me a while to even get there myself. I think some things I've done in my life, and by the way, I'm not perfect. There are plenty of times when I'll do something or say something and only after the fact realize, wow, I must have been in some sort of a mood. I wonder why, what caused that mood? How do I get a better understanding of that? But I think I've gotten a little bit more awareness just through, I'm doing some yoga, some occasional meditation, not a lot, but just becoming aware of the concept of being aware, right? That's even a thing, and that matters to be aware of your emotional state. But I think most people don't do that. I think, frankly, men are worse at this than women are. I think women tend to be more in touch with their emotions, more aware of the fact that they're having an emotion, whereas men tend to think that everything that's happening is because of some rational explanation that they can point to, and not necessarily because of an emotional state that they're in. I'm generalizing a little bit there, but that is my experience as a guy. So I think there's a little bit of difference there. But yeah, to your point, no, I think most people aren't. And I think having that awareness is really important, both in managing your own mood, but also trying to make a positive contribution to the mood of a group that you might be in.
Yeah. And that's, obviously I have the science behind this. So, so you're dead on. You're dead on. Correct. 10 points. But one of the questions I also wanted to talk to you about was like your well-being in work. Now, one of the things that you said was really interesting is that you find comfort uncomfortable. So you're someone who seeks out, things that push you, things that challenge you. To what point are those like stopping short of being good for you? I don't know if I'm explaining myself properly.
So in other words, seeking new challenges out and having that become a problem in and of itself?
Well, no, I guess if it's just looking for new challenges, that's one thing. I was very intrigued by the idea of being comfortable makes me uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering, like, do you associate like your personal sense of well-being by never being like completely settled, or how do you navigate those two? Finding because obviously when uncomfort is a state that the body doesn't love to be in. That's why
Yeah.
it's called uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
how do you navigate those two, like needing that feeling, but also needing to feel good at the same time?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think that I would say a couple of things. Number one, when I am feeling uncomfortable, I think there's different types of discomfort. There's one type where you feel challenged and pushed, but you feel like you're in the right place or moving toward a good place, and that discomfort is something that is welcoming. I might compare it to, I use this analogy a lot, actually. I talk about running a business, trying to start anything is like running a marathon. I've run a couple of marathons. And through the process of both training for and then running a marathon, there's an immense amount of discomfort, right? You are constantly in pain, sometimes more than others. You always have the opportunity to quit right in front of you. That's, to me, is why it's so amazing that people finish marathons. For 3 hours, 3.5 hours, 4, whatever amount of time it takes you to run that marathon, 5, that opportunity to quit is always literally right in front of you, just to stop running and walk off. But they run through all this discomfort anyway, and they do that because of the goal, right? They know there's a finish line, and it's all about getting to that line. So I think if the discomfort you're feeling is on that path to a line that you know is there and that you think you can reach, and you've put in the work and the training to know that you have the ability to get to that line, that's good. If, on the other hand, you're doing something where you really have no reason to believe you belong there. I mean, it would be uncomfortable for me if I got up in a plane with no training and a parachute and said, okay, I'm going to jump out of this plane, have no idea how this thing works, but hopefully that'll work out, right? That would be a sort of a reckless discomfort that, you need to maybe know the difference, right, between productive discomfort and reckless discomfort. And I guess that's what you call judgment, right? Is knowing where it's okay to be and uncomfortable versus a place where it's not okay to be. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It's, so there's another thing that I talk about frequently, like I get interviewed about a lot, which is the toxic productivity, because I, like you, am someone who cannot sit still. I'm always kind of pushing myself to the next and the next and the next. And at some point, it crosses over a line into unhealthy. And I, at the time, was not able to see what that line is. Now I have a much better, I was not one of those women that was very in tune with like what moods they were in or how they were feeling. I am now. I've got much better. I'm shocked
to hear that, Erika. That surprises me.
I know, but alas, I am not perfect either. It appears.
The jury's out. We'll wait for the viewers to vote on that. Okay.
Right. Okay. But there is a line because that sense of ambition and that sense of drive and motivation and goal and like happy achieving, which is I think it's a great thing. There is a point when it passes over to the dark side and becomes addictive, because our bodies and our brains are wired to want more of that which makes us feel good. And if productivity or ambition is what makes us feel good, then we can actually turn that into an unhealthy addiction. And it's hard to know when you're there and when you're over there.
You know what I think has been the best thing to keep me from ever going over that line, Erika, and I think you'll be able to relate to this.
I know what you're going to say. Yep.
Having kids. Is that what you thought I was going to say? Because for me, like having kids, I have 2 daughters. When I see them at the end of the day or the beginning of the day or whatever, they don't care, right? They don't care what I just did at work for the most part, or, hey, I just did this great interview, or I got this great deal done or whatever. They're kind of interested. They'll listen to your story and be interested for 30 seconds. But at the end of the day, they really don't care, right? All they really care about is you being present, right? You being there, you being present, you being fully present with them when you're together with them, not looking at your phone, not, on a conference call, whatever, but actually being present with them. And so for me, that's sort of forced a little bit of reeling in of some of that, where I'm just not gonna work, 18 hours a day and not see my kids, not, spend time with them, that kind of thing, because I don't want that. And frankly, they wouldn't even let me, they're going to sort of force me to be with them and to engage with them. So that is just such a different side of life, right? Where it's your presence and your engagement that really matter. That is a sort of, in a way, an antidote, if you will, to that kind of toxic productivity, for me at least.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I was telling a friend of mine the other day that I can't even imagine what my life would have been like if I didn't have my daughter, who was in one way, shape, or form a kite tether,
Mm-hmm.
who made sure I didn't go too far in any sort of insane directions.
Yeah, and for people who may be watching this who don't have kids, there are other
ways. Some.
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't need to go get kids. I mean, kids are great, but you don't have to go have kids just because of this. But I think there are other ways to get that feeling. What I think it is with your kids, you have unconditional value because you're their parent, you're their mother, you're their father, and you have value to them that is unconnected to anything you did or anything you accomplished, right? And that's what takes away some of that need for constant achievement. Is there isn't any achievement that's needed with them. It's just you being there and being you. That's the achievement. So there are other ways to get that sense of, worth and meaning. It can be in a community, it can be in a church, it can be in a social club, a team, whatever it is that you're into, where you are being told you have value just because you're there, right? And just because you're you and you're being present and you're there, and not because of something you did, some money you made. I think that's what people need is, they all want to achieve things, but I think they also all want to have a place where they can go and they have intrinsic value unrelated to anything that they actually accomplished.
And of course, the ideal would be that we have that ourselves, that we're able to provide that for ourselves.
100%. We should be able to have that and to give that to ourselves. And I think if you reach a certain point of whether it's spirituality that gets you there or whether it's some other way of recognizing your own worth, you have to have some of that does come from within, right? You do need that to have self-respect, to have self-worth. You do need some of that coming from within. I think most people probably need at least some of it coming from without as well.
But speaking about this stuff, I'll ask you one of my last two questions. So the first one is, what kind of wellness interventions, like personal or professional, do you think we'll be seeing a lot more of in the future?
I would say certainly meditation. That's had an explosion for sure. There have been businesses launched on it, apps, all kinds of things that are helping people do that. And I think we will continue to see more of that. I think there's real value in it. I don't practice it as much as I should, but I do think we'll see more of that. There's been such a mental health crisis and such an increased awareness of mental health in society over the last couple of years with the pandemic that I think people are more and more open to things that are helpful to maintaining balance and mental health. So that's one. trying to think if there are others. I mean, I personally think meaningful conversation is also something that is really important and under practiced in workplaces. I think having real conversations that are not on the topic of business, getting together, talking about your background, your childhood, your interests, who you really are as a person. I don't think enough of that happens in workplaces. And it makes a big difference when you are working with someone and you know a few things about how they grew up, what they liked as a kid, what their passions were, what their family is like. It doesn't need to get personal. A lot of people don't want to go too personal at work, but enough to give coworkers or business partners some sense of who you are, and not just as as your title, right, or the role or responsibility that you have. I think that's really important. I think people want to know the people they work with on some personal level, and want to be known and understood as well. So I'd like to see more of that happening in the workplace as well, because I think it helps people bring the humanity out a little bit in what they're doing. And I think that's necessary.
Yeah, I was going to say more humanity and less human capital discussions.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's actually data that shows that people who have a best friend, or at least a close relationship in the workplace, not only do better in terms of work performance, but they're also happier. They're more loyal. They like their job better. So it actually casts that positive mood halo on the rest of the team.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. It's huge to have that. Even if it's just one person that you can pick up the phone or go grab lunch or coffee with and just vent, right? Oh my God, I can't believe this thing just happened, or I can't believe he said that in that meeting, or whatever. Just to have someone to vent to and to check in with as a person from time to time makes a big difference. All of this remote work, I think, is probably making all of these things more challenging. I think that's one of the problems with remote work is you don't have those informal interactions with people, by the proverbial water cooler. I'm not sure if anybody even has water coolers anymore, but in the hallway, in the parking lot, the cafeteria, whatever. Like those spontaneous, unplanned interactions with people are huge in terms of really getting to know someone and getting to form a community. And it's really hard to do that when everything is on Zoom. You have no informal time. Here's the time from 1 to 1:30. We're meeting on Zoom to talk about this thing. And there's no, oh, hey, what's going on? How was your weekend? Just sort of small talk, that has no actual purpose, but to get to know each other. So I think that's one of the reasons a lot of people are kind of fed up with it. And I think a lot of companies more and more are realizing that they do need to have at least some in-person interactions.
Yeah. Well, I actually just did a survey on people responding to working from home and what the ideal was. And 90% of the people that responded wanted a mix of home and office. Like nobody was like, no, please keep me home. And nobody was like, no, please make sure I can only be in the office. Like everyone was really like, I love this new kind of thing where I have a little bit of interaction with other people and there's a sense of community. But literally everyone that responded was like, I do more work at home because there is none of that interaction, but I also need it, right? I can't be one without the other. So it's a really nice balance of the two.
I completely get that. And I completely agree with that. I think hopefully going forward, that balance will be available for people. Because 5 days in a row in the office can be a lot, especially if you have to commute. So people are happier when they have flexibility. And because they need it, everybody needs it, because we all have unexpected things that come up, and we have, whether it's family stuff or personal stuff or moods, right? They just make you, have days you'd rather be in your kitchen and days when you'd rather be in a cubicle. So I think everybody feels that.
Yeah. And it also gives a sense of control, like I have control over my own life. And that in and of itself, just that simple ability to decide, like, I'm going to do this from here, or I'm going to do that from there, actually makes an enormous difference in how people feel empowered to do their jobs.
100%.
All right. So last question for you. And this one's for the kids. What three pieces of advice would you give to a young person entering into the workforce today?
Oh gosh. Okay, three. That's really hard. The first thing I like to say is that pretty much every business is about relationships. So make relationships, right? Get mentors. Tell people you want them to be your mentors, I was saying earlier. Really value relationships and how you form them, and I think you form relationships by helping people, by doing favors, even when you don't need a favor done in return, by checking in, by just saying hi, like that, relationships are everything, no matter what business you're in. And so really have a focus on people and spend part of your day, every day, just maintaining, cultivating relationships, friendships, relationships with people who are both senior to you, as well as your peers, as well as people you can help. No matter how junior you might think you are, believe it or not, there's always someone who you can help as well. So form those relationships sort of 360, right? Up and down, as well as at the same level you're at. Secondly, I think decision-making is really important, and, really try to learn how to be a good decision maker. One of the phrases that I got from someone who was a mentor of mine at ESPN, he used to say, don't make a decision until you have to, but when you have to, make a decision, right? And so it's understanding when you actually have to make a decision and when you don't. Sometimes not making a decision can be the right decision because you allow yourself time to get more information, whether it's a career decision or a business decision, but then you do get to a point where, okay, you need to make a decision. And at that point, don't delay, don't be Hamlet, like make decisions and try to make them in ways that, you can look back on that decision and say, okay, maybe it was the right decision, maybe it was the wrong decision, but I made the decision the right way. I had the right inputs, the right information, the right, conversations. And based on what I knew at the time, it was a good decision-making process and therefore hopefully a good decision. But, sometimes you'll go through all that and do everything the right way and it still ends up 2020 not being the right decision, but that's something you can't control. So just try to make good decisions at the time with the information you could possibly have. And then, gosh, I think lastly, the thing I do always try to tell people is, and this sounds like such a cliche, but I mean, you've got to find something that gets you excited to do. As money is an important and very useful thing. And there is certainly a point at which if you don't have enough money or enough funds, it can cause discomfort, right? If you're really struggling financially, it is uncomfortable in a way that is not like the type of discomfort we talked about earlier, which is good discomfort. Real financial problems, that's bad discomfort. And so you want to make career choices that get you out of that zone of having money be a real problem. But I think once you've gotten to a certain point, for most people, that incremental amount of money is not necessarily worth it if the way you're getting it is not really making you fulfilled or happy. And I do think a lot of people fall into the trap of valuing everything they do based on money. Now, that sounds like a really mean thing to say, like, oh, all you care about is money. But when you think about it, and it goes back to decision making, it's hard to make decisions. It's hard to decide what to do, which way to go. And one of the reasons I think so many people make all their decisions based on money is because it just makes it easy. It's like, oh, well, this job pays $75,000. This one pays $120,000. Easy. I can do math. Take the one that pays more, right? It does take decision-making out of your hands in a way if you just let money make the decision for you. But I would really encourage people to just take money as one input among many that they use when making decisions. Because if you truly let money be the decider for you every single time, you will wake up at some point and realize that it didn't really work for you. It didn't really, you're in a place that you didn't choose to be in because you kept letting Benjamin Franklin make all the decisions. Sorry, that's an American reference if anybody overseas is listening. But you know what I'm saying? Like, make decisions. Don't let money make them for you.
Fantastic advice. And actually, especially coming from somebody who actually walked away from a huge job, the job that people would dream about, to follow something that was more in line with your own personal, like what you wanted to be, what you felt was comfortable for you, that you could feel uncomfortable going forward and achieving next levels.
That's why I'm a huge fan of Dave Chappelle, at least sometimes, not always. Sometimes he says things that get him in trouble. But if you look at his story, right, and you look at what he's done, it's incredible, right? I mean, he walked away from an immense amount of money to go down a different path, and he's done okay for himself going down that path with Netflix specials and things like that. I know he's in a little bit of political hot water right now, but if you look at what he's done, right, he made some really hard decisions along the way. People questioned his mental health. They thought he was crazy, right? And, it seems like it was all along this sort of way of thinking of not letting money make decisions for you. So easy to say, sometimes hard to do.
Very hard to do, yes. But let me let you go. Thank you so much for talking to us today. It was really a pleasure. Is there anything you'd like to share with the people that are listening to find your program, your app?
You can always go download the app. If you're in the United States, Persona Talks is the app name on the App Store, or personatalks.com.
All right. Awesome. Thank you again, Rob, for being with us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, Erika. Good to see you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Moodally Matters. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll catch you in the next episode of Moodally Matters.